Good evening. Today, you get to be Sir Isaac Newton, the man who discovered gravity, split light rays, and died, a virgin. If this little midnight field trip teaches you something, please toss a subscribe if you haven't already done it. And tell me in the comments what part of the world you are from, so the rest of the world can wish you a good night's sleep. I hope you truly love the stories I share with you all here. Now, turn down the lights, draw the curtains shut, slide into your sheets and let's begin. Christmas Day, 1642. Technically, 4th January 1643 in the modern calendar, but your paperwork is already confusing, and you're not even breathing properly yet. You arrive at Woolsthorpe Manor in rural Lincolnshire, England, premature, tiny, allegedly so small, your mother says you could have fit into a quart mug. You are born too early, too small, and into the wrong century for internet. That's the first running theme of your life. Everyone assumes you're not going to make it. The second theme, which I'm just going to spoil right now so we can use it as a running gag. At no point in this story do you ever get laid. None. Zero. A conservative estimate pulled directly from thin air but supported by Voltaire and half the biographers would be total romantic body count equals 0. You do, however, rewrite physics. So, immortality, yes. Intimacy, absolutely not. Please hold that contrast in your mind like an emotional Venn diagram with no overlap. You are born posthumously. Your father, also named Isaac Newton, is already dead. Your mother, Hannah, remarries a clergyman, the Reverend Barnabas Smith, and then does what every future genius's therapist dreams about. She leaves you behind with your grandmother and starts a new family without you. You grow up watching the house that should have been yours become someone else's life. You marinate in rejection, resentment, and the delightful aroma of 17th century livestock. At some point, as a teenager, you make a little list of your sins. This is normal Puritan behavior. You confess things like idle talk or not honoring the Sabbath. You, however, add, threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. Rigorous historical analysis read, guesswork, suggests you are maybe just a tiny bit angry. You are a skinny, awkward, introverted kid who would 100% be on physics TikTok if it existed. You build little mechanical toys, sundials, water clocks. You write poems that are bad. You draw. You build models of windmills. You are, in technical terms, not the village heartthrob. And quick progress reports still not having sex. At school in Grantham, you get bullied. There's a bigger boy. He hits you. You do not challenge him to a duel or write a diss track or subtweet him. Instead, you do the thing that terrifies every competent bully. You make a spreadsheet in your mind. You quietly vow revenge. You outstudy him, out-memorize him, out-everything him until you're top of the class. The technical term might be academic comeback, but the practical term is this man will absolutely hold grudges for 60 years. You also lodge with an apothecary family, surrounded by jars of powders, herbs, unlabeled mystery goo. Somewhere in that smell of vinegar, spirits, and vaguely suspicious smoke, your future as an alchemist in denial is born. Again, still no sex, but you and glassware? It's getting serious. Fast forward, your mother pulls you out of school because she wants you to be a farmer. You, personally, would rather be boiled alive in cow urine than be a farmer. By all surviving accounts, you are catastrophically bad at agriculture. You wander off, read books under hedges, and forget to do the ploughing. A strictly non-scientific survey of the sources suggests that everyone, including the cows, agrees this is not your calling. Eventually, relatives intervene. Clearly this boy is useless with a plough, but frightening with a pencil. Back to school you go, then on to Cambridge. Cambridge University, mid-1660s. It smells like ink, damp stone, wood smoke, and too many men in not enough laundry. You arrive as a poor student, a scissor, which is a nice academic way of saying you partially pay your fees by doing menial tasks for richer students. Think, world's first work-study program, but with more candles and plague. You eat in hall, in strict hierarchy. Your status is literally visible on your clothing and where you sit. Socially, you're near the bottom rung. Intellectually, you are quietly taking a chainsaw to the ladder. You start reading Descartes, Kepler, Galileo, stuff that was edgy enough a generation ago to get people in trouble. You copy out notes obsessively. You keep private notebooks of questiones where you ask yourself questions like, what if space extends infinitely? What is motion? Do we even know what body means? Using the highly advanced method known as reading stuff, you chew through the entire scientific revolution so far and decide, not unreasonably, that you can do better. Your religious life is equally extra. Outwardly, you're a good Protestant. Inwardly, you start to think the Trinity is theological fan fiction. Over the next decades, you'll secretly become Arian, believing that Christ is divine but not equal to the Father, and write hundreds of thousands of words on how everyone since the 4th century has basically misunderstood Christianity. You arrive at the conclusion that much of the church is heretical and that you, personally, have figured it out. You do not tell anyone. Heresy laws are still a thing. You would like to keep your head attached to your body and your access to the library intact. So you become what historians politely call a Nicodemite, outwardly orthodox, inwardly screaming at the margins of your own Bible. We'll put a pin in that. Apocalypse math is coming. In 1665, plague hits. Cambridge shuts down. You retreat back to Woolsthorpe for what PR brochures will later call your annus mirabilis, and what we, with the benefit of hindsight, can describe as the most productive quarantine in history. You are, roughly, 23 years old, home from college, socially isolated, chronically single running gag status intact, about to invent calculus out of sheer boredom. While the rest of England is doing a 17th century version of sourdough starter and wondering who's infected whom, you are quietly constructing a new language of change, fluxions that will underpin physics, engineering, and every annoying word problem about trains leaving stations at different times. You also work out early ideas about universal gravitation and optics. You poke sunlight through holes, bounce it off mirrors, ram it through prisms, and discover that white light is not pure and holy, but a chaotic mess of colors waiting to be split apart. It's kind of your whole approach to reality. Everything human beings thought was simple, actually a polychromatic nightmare. And then there's the apple. Later in life, sitting in a garden, you tell people that seeing an apple fall gave you the idea that the same force pulling fruit downward might be pulling the moon around the earth. Your niece tells Voltaire. Voltaire tells everyone. And somewhere along the way, the apple starts hitting you on the head like a slapstick sketch. Preliminary findings indicate that, no, it probably did not hit you in the head. Subsequent research has confirmed that, yes, the story still gets worse in every children's book retelling. What you actually do in the quiet of Woolsthorpe is more unsettling than a bonk on the skull. You imagine that every bit of matter in the universe attracts every other bit, all the time, invisibly. You give the universe a new rule, gravity, and then you have to live in it. You go back to Cambridge, now with lethal mental hardware. You take a fellowship at Trinity College. You become Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the disgustingly young age of 26. The job comes with expectations. You're supposed to become a priest eventually. You, being you, quietly refuse. You leverage connections, loopholes, and what we might now call creative contract interpretation to avoid holy orders. It's not that you aren't religious, you absolutely are. You're just religious in a way that, if shared publicly, would end with a bonfire and a pile of your books being described as evidence. Meanwhile, you start lecturing on optics. Imagine yourself in a dark hall, chalk dust in the air, a prism catching a sliver of window light. You show the undergrads that white light breaks into a rainbow and then plot twist can be recombined. You conclude that color is not some impurity in glass or the fault of the prism. It's in the light itself. Empirical evidence, also called vibes, implies that some of your colleagues are not ready for this. Enter Robert Hooke. Hooke is older, already famous, clever, cranky, and curator of experiments at the Royal Society. He's done major work in microscopy, elasticity, and also has opinions about light, a wave theory, to be precise. You present your new ideas. He says, basically, you're wrong, child. The methodology was robust. The people were not. You, having spent your childhood plotting revenge over schoolyard slights, are not emotionally equipped for constructive criticism. You react by taking this immensely personally, refusing to publish more than necessary, filing Robert Hooke under the category of enemies, lifelong. You will do something similar with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the other man who, independently, develops calculus. When the priority dispute explodes, you will help engineer a Royal Society committee to investigate the matter. Then, totally impartially, write its report yourself, anonymously, in your own favor. Peer review in this case meant, my cousin agrees. You also write to Hooke the now famous line, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. This may be humility. It may also, as some historians dryly suggest, be a joke about Hooke being small and physically hunched. Academia has not changed much. Throughout your 30s and 40s, you become less a man and more an all-consuming research engine. You sleep badly, forget to eat, and work until you're ill. You run experiments with light. You compute orbits. You tinker with telescopes. You forget that other human beings have inner lives unless they are comets. You also start doing alchemy. A lot of alchemy. Not as a quirky side hobby, as a full-time parallel career. You accumulate one of the finest private alchemical libraries in Europe. At least 169 books in your later years, probably more earlier. You copy recipes for transmutation, distillation, mysterious oils and salts. You annotate alchemical treatises, trying to decode symbols and metaphors. You stare at furnaces, alembics, crucibles, and strange crusts in glassware until dawn. You are trying to find the philosopher's stone, not metaphorically, literally. To you, this isn't unscientific. There is no clean line yet between chemistry, magic, metallurgy, and theology. You think that somewhere in this bubbling mess is the key to matter, motion, and maybe God. You also, by the way, probably poison yourself. Decades later, strands of your hair will be tested and found to contain a lot of mercury, which is commonly used in alchemy. This may help explain your nervous breakdowns, paranoia, and general flavor of man who hasn't slept since the Restoration. Controlled experiments were not, tragically, involved. At the same time, you write millions of words on theology, biblical chronology, and prophecy. You go through Daniel, Revelation, and assorted church histories with a calculator disguised as piety. You decide, after an immense amount of date wrangling, that the end of the current world order will not arrive before 2060. You explicitly say, "I'm not predicting the exact date. I'm just telling people to stop making wild end times predictions that embarrass scripture when they fail." A longitudinal study, AK, watching this unfold in slow motion, shows that humanity ignores your advice completely and continues to predict the end of the world every few years anyway. You publish almost none of this religious or alchemical work during your lifetime. You know it's dynamite, theologically heretical, scientifically weird, and reputationally risky, so you leave it in manuscripts for some hypothetical future that can handle the fact that the guy who gave them gravity also believed himself chosen by God to decode secret prophecies. Instead, you go public with the thing that is hardest to deny, the math. In 1687, after years of coaxing by Edmund Halley, yes, comic guy, no, he does not get enough credit, you publish Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the Principia, which, in modern terms, is like dropping a full physics engine into reality and walking away. You give the world 3 laws of motion, a law of universal gravitation, a demonstration that the same equations explain apples, cannonballs, moons, planets, and your lingering sense of dread. It's not just that you explain why things fall. You explain why they don't fly off, why orbits are ellipses, why tides happen, why Kepler's laws work. You turn the cosmos from a set of vibes into a set of equations. All available data, plus some speculation, point to this being one of the worst days in history to be an astrologer. Meanwhile, your personal life continues to look like the control group in a study about romance. There is one emotionally significant relationship historians keep circling: your friendship with Nicolas Fatio de Doulier, a Swiss mathematician. The correspondence gets intense. There is a falling out. You have some kind of psychological collapse afterwards. Opinions vary wildly on how to interpret this. Devotional, intellectual, romantic, none of the above. But whatever it is, it does not end in marriage or acknowledged partnership. Voltaire later claims you never went near any woman, and rumors circulate that you boasted on your deathbed of never having known one, in the biblical sense. Evidence is thin, but the myth sticks. The meme, Newton died a virgin, becomes almost as durable as his laws. Our sample size is 1, but it's a very confident one. So, you, the audience as Newton, get to enjoy the following trade-off. Level of intellectual impact, obscene. Amount of money ultimately made, respectable, then wrecked, then okay. A guy. Number of sex scenes in your biopic, 0. Roll credits. Let's talk about the money part. By the 1690s, you are tired of academic sniping and fragile optics egos. You also need cash. The Crown, in its infinite wisdom, is trying to fix the English coinage system, which is a disaster of clipped silver and counterfeit chaos. You are appointed Warden of the Royal Mint in 1696, then Master in 1699. You take this job extremely seriously. You design meticulous assays to test coins. You basically invent forensic finance before CSI exists. You go undercover in taverns to gather evidence against counterfeiters. You build cases so tight that people get hanged based on your paperwork. The methodology is robust. The counterfeiters are definitely not. The recoinage works. British currency becomes more uniform, more trusted, more annoying to fake. You are now not just the guy who explains planets. You're also the guy who explains why your landlord insists on a specific kind of shilling. This role pulls you into the heart of London's emerging financial world, where government debt, trade companies, and stock markets are beginning to look suspiciously like the kind of bubble graphs that will one day haunt MBA programs. Enter the South Sea Company. Formed in 1711, it takes over a huge chunk of government debt in exchange for a monopoly on trade with Spanish America. Mostly this means the right to sell enslaved Africans into Spanish colonies, plus some vague promises of future profit. Investors do not read the fine print, they read rumors, and the share price skyrockets in 1720. You, Isaac Newton, master of the mint, wizard of numbers, buy in early. The price rises. You sensibly sell, making a handsome profit. For a brief, shining moment, you are the poster child of rational investing. Then the price keeps going up. Your friends get richer. Shoemakers, widows, duchesses all seem to be doubling and tripling their money while you stand on the sidelines, clutching your sensible profit like a fool. Groupthink, as one historian politely calls it, smashes into you. You re-enter the market near the top, this time putting in a vast chunk of your fortune. Then the bubble bursts. Estimates vary, but you may lose the equivalent of several million in modern currency. Legend says you remark, bitterly, I can calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. A strictly non-scientific survey of humanity since then suggests this remains accurate. You still die wealthy enough, estate around £30,000, which is a lot, but the South Sea incident becomes a parable. Even the man who domesticated gravity cannot domesticate FOMO. While all this is happening, you are also president of the Royal Society, knighted by Queen Anne, and presiding over London scientific life like a somewhat haunted statue that occasionally starts a feud. You feud with Leibniz. You feud with Flamsteed, the Astronomer Royal, over star catalogues and who gets credit for what. You feud with anyone who messes with your sense of priority. You are not above anonymous pamphlets, committee reports written by yourself, or strategic leaking of documents. Subsequent research has confirmed that, yes, it got worse. And yet, you also maintain warm friendships with people like Halley, John Locke, Samuel Pepys, Christopher Wren. You dine, you attend salons. Your half-niece Catherine Barton acts as your hostess and social interface with the world. You are not a total recluse. You are just a man who relates to human beings primarily as perturbations in an otherwise clean orbit. All the while, your private religious project goes on. You write The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, trying to compress and rearrange global history into a timeline that fits your reading of the Bible. You produce elaborate charts of kings, empires, floods, and prophecies. Your dates do not line up with what modern historians think, but the sheer audacity of the attempt is Olympic. You spend vastly more words on revelation than on gravity. From a modern perspective, this is like watching someone drop Grand Theft Auto 6 and then spend the rest of their life modding Minesweeper. You also interpret your own life through this lens. You believe that God has chosen a few special people across time to decode his works in nature and scripture, and that you are one of them. The cosmos is a puzzle. Your job is to solve it. It's not arrogance in the Instagram sense. It's more pre-enlightenment, main character energy. And, to keep us honest, through all of this, still not having sex. The running gag is a structural choice now. Every time we come back to your life, no matter how wild the accomplishments, the romantic subplot is an empty set. It's not a moral failing. It's not an achievement. It's just a fact, sitting there, as stubborn as an inverse square law. You age. Your body, which you have mostly treated as an inconvenient vehicle for a brain, starts to complain. You have kidney stones. You suffer from digestive issues. You do not exactly practice work-life balance. You have, in modern parlance, the self-care routine of a raccoon in a library. You spend time at Cranberry Park with your niece and her husband, then return to London, living near Leicester Square, and later in Kensington. You are a public monument now, a man people point at in the street, whispering, "That's him." You keep editing your religious manuscripts, tinkering with dates, polishing arguments against the Trinity that you will never dare to print. You refuse the sacrament on your deathbed, perhaps a final, quiet assertion of your unorthodox beliefs. On 20th March, 17, 27, 31 March, in the new style, you die in your sleep, aged 84, old for your time, legendary for any time. You are buried in Westminster Abbey among kings and queens. You are the first scientist given that honor. Your coffin is carried by noblemen. A massive monument is erected, Latin inscription and all, presenting you not as the last of the magicians, but as the first of the moderns. Based on extensive archival snooping, we know they are only telling half the story. Because here's the thing, if we strip away the marble and myth, what's left is a man who nearly didn't survive infancy, was emotionally abandoned, then obsessed with control, was spectacularly gifted at math and catastrophically bad at letting things go, split light, quantified motion, and built a clockwork universe, then spent decades trying to find secret messages from God in the gears. The life of Isaac Newton is not a neat science triumphs over superstition TED talk. It's messier, weirder, funnier. You, not the YouTube viewer you, but the 17th century you inhabiting this story, are basically running 3 operating systems at once. Natural philosophy, OS. Rigor, experiment, mostly. Mathematics, optics, mechanics. Alchemy OS. Furnaces, mercury, cryptic symbols, optimistic explosions. Prophecy OS. Bible, apocalyptic timelines, anti-Trinitarian arguments, end-of-days date ranges. Sometimes they sink, often they crash. Your work at the Mint connects alchemy to metallurgy to national finance. Your recoinage project looks suspiciously like applied alchemy, purifying base metal into stable currency, stamping the king's face on it instead of a mystical symbol. Historians have even argued that you saw this as a continuation of your alchemical interests, turning chaos into order, literally weighing and measuring matter in pursuit of hidden laws. Your theology feeds back into your science. You believe God is not a one-time clockmaker, but an active sustainer of the universe, occasionally tweaking orbits and laws. You reject the idea of a purely mechanistic cosmos left to decay. So while later generations will use Newtonian as a synonym for cold, impersonal physics, you yourself absolutely do not think you live in a godless machine. You think you live inside a divinely scripted, mathematically coherent, symbolically enchanted drama. Modern people read your Principia and say, "Ah yes, rationality." They read your prophecy notebooks and say, "Ah yes, he had mercury poisoning." Both are incomplete. The methodology of your life was robust. The man was not. And what does all this matter now, in a world where people scroll past astrophysics to watch a guy put Mentos in Diet Coke? First, Newton gives us a kind of origin story for the modern genius trope, the solitary, socially awkward, romantically questionable brain on legs who changes everything. Every tech founder cosplay, every tortured nerd biopic is running on your template, whether it knows it or not. Second, your South Sea disaster is basically the pilot episode of Smart People Making Dumb Financial Decisions, a series that has been renewed for 300 consecutive years. It's a reminder that IQ doesn't come with an automatic patch for greed, fear, or groupthink. Third, your virginity meme, true or not in detail, does something uncomfortable. It forces us to admit that being historically important is not the same as being personally fulfilled. You can discover universal gravitation and still never figure out how to hold someone's hand in a way that doesn't feel like an experiment. And finally, your occult side refuses to stay in the footnotes. That part of you reminds us that science didn't replace magic in a clean handover. It grew out of it, rearranged its tools, and rebranded. You are an alchemist who accidentally invents modern physics while looking for God in a furnace. So here you are, in the 21st century, watching this on a glowing rectangle that runs on equations you helped make possible. You might feel a little inferior. Your to-do list today was answer 3 emails and maybe stretch, whereas Newton's was invent calculus, explain comets, accidentally launch classical mechanics, dabble in heresy, and send some counterfeiters to the gallows. But remember, you also probably shower more often, have some concept of work-life balance, and are statistically more likely to have at least one person who will voluntarily hug you. All available data, plus some speculation, point to that being worth something. If you walk away from Newton's life with anything, let it be this: you don't have to be that extreme to matter. You don't have to choose between total cosmic insight and basic human connection. You can chase truth without spending every night with mercury fumes and an end-time spreadsheet. You can let gravity be gravity, the markets be insane, prophecy be uncertain, and still decide not to rewrite all of chronology before bed. In the end, Isaac Newton gives you 2 models. One, the formal one: bodies attract, motions obey laws, light splits, math works. 2, the informal one: a single, fragile person, full of grudges and obsessions, somehow bends history around himself. You will almost certainly not be Newton. But unlike Newton, you are allowed to close the book, turn off the lab lamps, and text somebody who might actually text you back. In a universe held together by invisible forces, that's its own small, miraculous law. Our second story tonight begins with a question that no empire really wants to hear from its subjects. So, what if we just walk? Not march in formation with shiny boots and percussion section, not ride in with cannons and flags, but walk, bare feet, worn sandals, questionable arches. It is, strategically speaking, somewhere between inspired and idiotic. A conservative estimate, pulled directly from thin air, would be that at least half the people involved thought, at some point, this was a terrible idea. And that, of course, is where history tends to get interesting. Picture it: British India in the early 20th century. The empire has taxes on many things, but one of the most offensive, in the truly petty sense of the word, is the salt tax. It is hard to overstate how rude it is to make people pay extra for the privilege of not dying of dehydration in a subtropical climate. Salt is in the food, on the skin, in the sweat, in the tears, in the sea nearby that everyone can see but is not legally allowed to scoop from because that would upset the spreadsheet. This is essentially a story about people who looked at that spreadsheet and decided to blister their way through it. Sabarmati Ashram, near Ahmedabad. The air smells of dust, wood smoke, cow, and human nerves. It is early morning. Birds are yelling. Someone's stomach is also yelling. The sky is that pale, washed kind of blue you get before the sun has fully decided to ruin everyone's day. At the center of it all is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, slight, bespectacled, wrapped in homespun cloth, and radiating the unbothered intensity of a yoga instructor who has decided that the entire subcontinent needs to work on its breath. Based on extensive archival snooping and the highly advanced method known as reading stuff, we know he has been building up to this moment for years, spinning, fasting, going to jail, annoying British officials who have to write very long reports about a man who refuses to wear proper trousers. Around him, a small band of chosen marchers, plus a much larger cloud of villagers, volunteers, onlookers, skeptics, fans, and people who are definitely there because they heard there might be free food. It's basically non-violent civil disobedience with a whole lot of walking. Our longitudinal study, also known as watching this unfold in slow motion, suggests that the main characters of this story are not only the famous leader and the high officials, but also the anonymous feet. The feet that will soon be rubbed raw, wrapped in rags, soaked in sweat, and marched across dusty roads in sandals that were not, in any way, designed for long-distance performance. Everyone signed up to make salt. No one signed up to become human blister farms. The villagers, meanwhile, are about to discover what it feels like when a vision of national liberation walks literally past their front door, sweating. To understand the salt march from their view, you have to forget the drone shots and newsreels and think like someone whose world is measured in fields, wells, and the distance to the nearest market. There are no push notifications, no trending hashtags, no breaking news banners. Information travels through gossip, letters, and that one cousin who always claims to have inside sources, meaning he once eavesdropped at the post office. So when word spreads that Gandhi is going to walk from Sabarmati to the sea to break the salt laws, most villagers receive this as follows. 1. Confusion. 2. Curiosity. 3. A sudden flurry of practical questions, such as, are we feeding all these people? A strictly non-scientific survey of the sources suggests that villagers fell roughly into 3 groups. Group 1. True believers who thought this was a holy act, a kind of moving pilgrimage of justice. Group 2. People who respected Gandhi but also had to harvest crops and keep their buffalo from running into the irrigation ditch again. Group 3. Skeptics, professional eye-rollers, and uncles who muttered, "Ah yes, the British will be so scared of thin men and salt." The methodology was robust. The people were not. Morning of departure. Gandhi steps out. The original core group is around him. Men in white khadi, carrying walking sticks, turbans tied tight. Songs begin. Bhajans and patriotic hymns that smell faintly, if sound could smell, of incense and adrenaline. Drums thump like an impatient heartbeat. The dust picks up with every footfall, rising into the air and coating everything in a clingy beige that will, by the end of this, become the official color palette of the movement. The marchers look impressive for approximately the first 20 minutes. Feet slap sand, cloth swishes, children run ahead, and villagers line the roadside. craning necks, shading eyes with calloused hands. The spectacle is real, a living river of humans moving with intention, not to market, not to a festival, but to break a law that most empires would happily jail you for even thinking about. You, if you were standing there watching, would feel that odd mix of chill and sweat. The chill of something big is happening, and the sweat of the sun is climbing, and these people are going to smell interesting very soon. Empirical evidence, also called vibes, implies that even the skeptical villagers felt something stir. If not patriotism, then at least curiosity. Who are these people? How far are they going? Are they insane? Are they saints? Are they both? How long before they start complaining? Preliminary findings indicate that the complaining began roughly when the first blister did. Mechanically, the march is a process. It has rules, rhythms, and unglamorous logistics. They walk in the morning, when the heat is still negotiable. Each day has a route, planned like a very low-tech version of a fitness app challenge. No one is counting steps. They are just trying to make sure no one collapses into a drainage ditch. The pace is steady, not hurried, designed so older men and less robust bodies can keep up. This is not a race. It is a slow burn act of defiance in which the body becomes both the message and the medium. There are songs to keep rhythm, prayers to keep courage, and speeches at each stop. The official speeches are about tyranny, salt laws, self-rule, and the moral duty of resistance. The unofficial mutters are about chafing, thirst, and how that one guy snores like an industrial saw. Controlled experiments were not, tragically, involved in designing the footwear. Most marchers wear simple sandals, leather straps, thin soles, not exactly engineered with arch support in mind. Some go barefoot, relying on the spiritual protection of righteousness and the physical protection of calluses, the thickness of small novels. The roads are rough, stones, thorns, animal droppings, the occasional shard of British manufactured glass, because empire is nothing if not consistent in providing hazards. The first blisters bloom like small, angry planets under toes and heels. At night, in villages where hosts spread charpoys and mats, you get a second, less photographed ritual, the tending of feet. Someone brings oil, someone else brings warm water. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and medicinal herbs. Men sit in circles, washing, drying, massaging their swollen feet. Skin peels, nails look questionable. A conservative estimate, again pulled from thin air, but backed by common sense, would be that at least half of them consider quitting in that moment. Subsequent research has confirmed that, yes, it got worse. Meanwhile, the villagers hosting them are having their own experience of walking history into existence. For many, this is the first time they have seen Gandhi up close, not as a photo or a rumor, but as a real human being who eats, coughs, and occasionally looks as tired as everyone else. They watch him eat simple food, listen to his soft but pointed speeches, see the way he jokes with children and scolds adults who try to push him to endorse violence. They talk about him late into the night, voices low, trying not to wake guests sprawled in every corner. Some are awed, some are skeptical, some are mostly concerned that the goats will eat the visitor's totis off the washing line again. All available data, plus some speculation, point to a particular kind of intimacy that only comes from mass inconvenience. When a famous leader and dozens and then hundreds of followers show up at your village, they do not bring hotel reservations. They bring bodies that need food, space, and latrines. The villagers cook huge pots of kishti, chapatis by the stack, vegetables spiced and stretched to feed many mouths. Women stir and knead and gossip about Gandhi, about their own men, about the state of the world, about who almost fainted and who looks suspiciously interested in that volunteer from the next village. Yes, even in a grand national struggle, human beings continue to be human beings. Focus on religion, power, and salt all you like. Somewhere in the crowd, two people are absolutely having a small, fluttering eye contact moment over the dal pot. A strictly non-scientific study of revolutions indicates that there is always at least one crush per protest. The marchers, meanwhile, lie in rows, sometimes in courtyards, sometimes in temples, sometimes in open fields under the stars. The night is loud. Crickets, dogs, someone loudly discussing theology, a couple of men arguing gently about whether non-violence will actually work. When the police start hitting people, another guy sawing logs with his nose. You, dear viewer, you have left group chats for less ambient chaos. And yet, somehow, in this mess of bodies and smells and noise, something like solidarity forms, shared suffering, shared jokes, shared fear. When they get up the next morning and wrap their now angrier feet in cloth, they are not simply continuing a walk. They are resigning on to a slow-motion confrontation with an empire. The British, for their part, are having a terrible time trying to decide how to respond. On one side, a man in simple clothes, thousands of villagers, no weapons, a lot of singing. On the other, the full machinery of imperial rule, armed policemen, laws, jails, and an absolute allergy to looking ridiculous in front of the world. A longitudinal study of British bureaucracy, spanning several centuries and more memos than any god intended, suggests that the thing they fear, almost as much as rebellion, is embarrassment. You can almost hear the arguments in government offices. If we arrest him, he will become a martyr. If we do nothing, he will become a legend. If we tax salt any harder, we will become a punchline. There are district officers who would probably rather wrestle a crocodile than deal with one more letter about Gandhi walking through their jurisdiction. Local police are instructed to watch, report, and try not to cause an incident. This leads to some of the strangest scenes of the march. Lines of lathi-wielding policemen standing stiffly by while a river of villagers flows past, singing songs about their own courage and the cowardice of oppression. It is like being the bouncer at a nightclub where everyone is barefoot and chanting. At the village level, police presence creates a nervous electricity. Villagers have to navigate the tension between hospitality to the marchers and fear of reprisal. They know how fragile their livelihoods are. Land revenue, debt, caste politics, and monsoon patterns already make survival a yearly negotiation. Adding annoying the empire to the list feels risky. Empirical evidence from oral histories suggests that many villagers did what people always do in such situations. They hedged, they fed the marchers, but quietly. They joined songs, but maybe not at the front. They cheered speeches from the edge of the crowd, ready to melt away if the police moved. Others threw themselves in wholeheartedly, because restraint has never been a universal human trait. Young men in particular felt the seductive pull of being part of something larger than their village, their caste, their daily grind. To walk with Gandhi, even for a few miles, was to insert your anonymous life into the national narrative. It was a limited time offer and came with, unfortunately, unlimited blisters. Every grand cause is built on the unphotographed suffering of feet. As the days pass, the march grows. People peel off to go home. more join from villages along the way. What began as a relatively small group becomes a moving city of hunger and sore muscles. Songs multiply, new slogans appear, some poetic, some less so. Data collection methods were, at best, improvisational, but one can assume a high frequency of off-key singing. They pass fields of wheat and cotton, irrigation wells, small temples with clanging bells. Children run alongside, screaming joyfully until their mothers drag them back. Old men, beards like snow and backs like question marks, stand at the roadside and raise trembling hands in blessing. Women peek from doorways and behind veils, whispering to each other, faces lit with something that might be hope, or might be finally, something different is happening. Religion is everywhere, of course. Gandhi is not simply a political leader. To many, he is a saint in the making, a kind of walking relic. Touching his feet, glimpsing his face, hearing his voice is a spiritual event, filed in the same mental category as visiting a holy shrine. Prayers are offered, flowers thrown, incense burned. The march becomes, at times, indistinguishable from a pilgrimage, except the deity invoked is self-rule. When everyone called it mass movement, the lived experience is closer to extended family road trip with high stakes and no snacks. As for the more scandalous human details the historians like to poke at, temptations, gossip, petty jealousies, they are there, if mostly unrecorded. Someone hogs the shade under the one large tree at a rest stop. Someone else is suspiciously often near a particular water bearer. Someone mutters that the speeches are too long. Someone else thinks they are not fiery enough. The human capacity for complaint has never known a political party. Our sample size is one, but it is a very confident one. Wherever humans gather in large numbers, there is at least one person sneaking off to smoke, one silently judging everyone's singing, and one loudly overestimating their own importance. In the evenings, after speeches about justice and tyranny, laughter bubbles up, jokes about British officials, jokes about each other. Jokes about how someone misheard a slogan and shouted something completely different for half an hour. Humor becomes a kind of armor, a buffer against fear. Why does the exact sound of bare feet on dusty roads and the smell of bruised skin and simple food simmering in giant pots tell us anything about the fight for independence? Because power is not only contested in parliaments and battlefields, but also in the mundane acts of refusing to obey. The salt tax, in all its petty cruelty, represented the daily reach of empire into the most intimate parts of life. What you eat, what you preserve, what you put on your tongue. To challenge it was to say, you do not own our sweat, using the highly advanced method known as reading stuff. Scholars have argued that the salt march mattered less for the actual salt produced and more for the spectacle of the journey. It showed, in slow, deliberate motion, that ordinary people could step out of their assigned roles, tenant, labourer, housewife, shopkeeper, and become participants in a national drama. Villagers who hosted the marchers would tell their grandchildren, decades later, Gandhi slept here, or the volunteers sat in our courtyard, or I saw the police standing there, hands on lathis, looking like they had swallowed lemons. The memory became a family heirloom, more prized than jewellery, though not nearly as useful in paying for weddings. And then, finally, there is the sea. Imagine you are one of the marchers, coming over the last rise and smelling it before you see it. The salty tang on the wind, mixing with the sweat on your lips, the dust in your nose, the faint smoky trace of someone's breakfast being cooked in a hut nearby. Your feet hurt in a way that has ceased to be interesting, they are simply pain machines attached to your legs. A conservative estimate, again plucked from the ripe tree of imagination, would be that your blisters have their own blisters. The coastline at Dundee is not some cinematic white sand paradise. It is a practical, muddy, slightly unimpressed stretch of earth meeting water. The sort of place where fishermen work and salt pans glimmer in the sun. But today, it is a stage. Gandhi walks down to the shore. Villagers crowd, some having travelled from nearby, others having walked the whole way. Police watch from a distance, notebooks in hand, recording everything with the solemn attention of people who know the odd intimacy of walking history into existence and are being paid to be awkward about it. He reaches down, picks up a lump of salty mud, and the world tilts. From a strictly legal perspective, this is trivial. From a political and symbolic perspective, it is an earthquake in slow motion. Here is a subject of the British Crown deliberately manufacturing contraband salt in public, saying, in essence, "Your law is unjust. I will not obey it. And you can either arrest me or swallow this insult whole." Using the phrase manufacturing for picking up salty mud is a reminder that law is often just creative labeling with armed backing. Villagers watching this scene experience a mix of awe and slight disappointment that history looks so squelchy. There is no thunderclap, no halo, no choir. Just a man, bending his spine, letting his bony fingers close around wet, gritty earth. Some of them, emboldened, do the same. Hands reach to the ground, scoop, lift. Salt crystals cling to skin. The texture is rough, sharp, insistent. It tastes like defiance, which is to say, it tastes exactly like salt, only more expensive if you get caught. Peer review in this case meant my cousin agrees that this feels important. News of this act travels across India and around the world, carried by journalists, letters, word of mouth. Images of Gandhi making salt, of villagers breaking the law with their bare hands, circulate far beyond Dundee. British officials are horrified. Supporters are electrified. Neutrals are forced to pick a side, or at least to admit that something big just happened, and no one can rewind it. But the story does not end at the waterline. In many ways, that moment is just the spark. The slow-burning fire spreads further inland. In the days and weeks after the march, villagers in many regions begin making their own illegal salt, staging their own small acts of disobedience. There are raids on government salt depots, marches on salt works, confrontations with police. At Dharasana, non-violent protesters walk into lines of lathi-wielding policemen and are beaten to the ground, again and again. Their bodies piling up like a human tide that refuses to recede. Our longitudinal study, also known as looking back with horrified admiration, confirms that this was not only heroic, but also, from the perspective of necks and skulls and ribs, an absolutely terrible idea. Villagers hear of these events with a kind of horrified pride. In tea stalls and under banyan trees, they talk about men lying bleeding on the ground, refusing to lift a hand in retaliation. They argue about whether such restraint is saintly or foolish. They wonder if they would have the courage to do the same. Some say yes, some say no. Some say, very reasonably, I have children, I have crops, I have debts. Who will feed my family if I get my head smashed? Empirical evidence, also called vibes, implies that the actual distribution of courage is uneven and situational. Yet even those who never raise a hand or lower one in deliberate non-violence are changed. The idea that the empire is unshakable has taken a hit. If a man in a loincloth can walk to the sea, pick up salt, and make the most powerful government in the world look absurd, then perhaps the world is less fixed than it seemed. At the micro level, the march leaves behind an invisible trail in village social fabric. Volunteers return home as minor celebrities. People treat them with a mix of admiration and annoyance. They have stories now about singing with Gandhi, sleeping beside strangers, facing police stares. They bring back new songs, new slogans, new habits of questioning. Some become local organizers. Others simply go back to plowing fields, but their sense of belonging has expanded from village to nation. At least one of them will tell embellished stories at family gatherings forever. All available data, plus some speculation, point to that one uncle who claims he was Gandhi's personal favorite despite demonstrable lack of evidence. And those blisters, they fade. Skin heals, nails regrow, calluses remain, thicker than before. But the memory of the pain, the weight, the heat, the intimate indignities of mass movement, sharing latrines, snoring in each other's ears, smelling each other's unwashed selves, lingers as a strange kind of nostalgia. Ask any marcher, years later, about the Salt March, and you would likely get three kinds of responses. 1. The grand narrative. We walked for justice. We defied the British. We made history. 2. The sensory flashback. The dust got everywhere. The food at that one village was amazing. The sun, I can still feel it. 3. The blister report. My feet have never been the same. A strictly non-scientific survey of memory suggests that pain, meaning, and food are the three main categories in which humans file historical experiences. From the villager's view, the memory is spatial. They point to places. He walked past there. They slept in this courtyard. The police stood under that tree. The physical geography of the march route becomes mapped onto emotional landscapes, pride, fear, excitement, anxiety. For some, it is the first time they felt the national movement as something other than a newspaper headline or a rumor from the town. It was in their field, on their street, in their house. History, that abstract textbook beast, turned up for dinner and asked for more rice. In our modern world, where activism often unfolds in hashtags and live streams, it is easy to forget what old school, analog dissent feels like. No air conditioning. No comfy sneakers with gel insoles. No food delivery apps making sure you are fueled for justice. Just bodies, roads, weather, and the stubborn decision to keep moving. If you are tempted to romanticize it, imagine your last long walk. Now subtract your cushioned footwear, your water bottle, your motivational playlist, and your ability to bail and call a ride. Add the knowledge that the state might arrest you, beat you, or quietly ruin your life. That is the baseline setting these marchers operated in. Preliminary findings indicate that this was, to repeat, a terrible idea in terms of physical comfort and personal safety. Subsequent research has confirmed that, yes, it was also one of the most effective pieces of performance politics in modern history, because that is what the Salt March is, at some level, a piece of theatre. A non-violent, multi-week, participatory play in which everyone who joined or watched became an extra or a supporting character in the drama of self-rule. The script was simple: walk, sing, suffer, disobey. The staging was elaborate: villages, fields, roads, police lines, the sea. The props were minimal: walking sticks, spinning wheels, salt. And at the heart of it, always, the odd intimacy of shared motion. There is a closeness that comes from walking beside someone for miles, hearing their breath rise and fall, seeing them sweating and stumbling and pushing on anyway. The villagers who walked a few miles with the marchers, then peeled off to go home, tasted this. For a brief moment, their ordinary lives synced with a larger current. Then they stepped back onto the shore, watching the river of people move on. You can almost see them standing there, watching dust settle, feeling the quiet crash back in. Chickens cluck, children whine. Someone calls them to fetch water. Life resumes. But in their minds, a new path has been laid, leading not just to the well, the market, the temple, but to a bigger idea, that their footsteps can add up to something more than survival. Based on extensive archival snooping and a strictly non-scientific survey of memoirs, interviews, and nostalgic exaggerations, we can say this much. The Salt March was not comfortable, it was not clean, it was not, in any normal sense, practical. It was blister-ridden, sweat-soaked, logistically messy, emotionally confusing, and occasionally ridiculous. The British thought, for a time, that it might fizzle or backfire. Some villagers thought the same. Some marchers did too, especially around the moment when the skin on their feet started to resemble badly cooked roti. The methodology was robust. The people, as previously noted, were not. And yet, somehow, this slow procession of aching bodies and stubborn minds shifted the story of an empire. If you zoom out far enough, it looks like a line on a map. Sabarmati to Dandi, a neat little arrow in a history book. If you zoom in, you see cracked heels, sweating backs, nervous glances at police, big pots of rice, hurried prayers, whispered jokes, stolen naps under trees, and that one guy who kept insisting he did not need to rest while clearly about to pass out. All available data, plus a comfortable amount of speculation, point to this conclusion. Sometimes, to change the world, you do not need a grand, complicated plan with charts and committees. You need a simple action, repeated by many, carried on sore feet and stubborn hearts. You need the willingness to turn your body into a message, your blister into a footnote, your village street into a piece of a much bigger road. And maybe, just maybe, you need the sense of humor to look at your own aching feet and say, preliminary findings indicate that this hurts like hell, but subsequent research will confirm it was worth it. So the next time someone talks about the Salt March in tidy phrases, non-violent resistance, civil disobedience, pivotal moment in the struggle for independence, picture also the villagers stirring giant pots, the children running alongside for a while, before being hauled back by exasperated mothers, the police sweating in their uniforms wondering whether they will be ordered to beat singing men, and the marchers peeling off their sandals at night, hissing as cool air hits raw skin. Picture the textures, rough road, gritty salt, coarse cloth, smell the sweat, dust, and cooking fires. Hear the songs, off-key but heartfelt, rising into a sky that has seen empires rise and fall, and will, with enormous patience, watch a few more go. History, in this case, was not just written by the victors, it was walked into existence by the blisters. Which, when you think about it, is a very on-brand move for a nation that decided to take on an empire using salt, patience, and the sheer audacity of sore feet. Somewhere, in the vast ledger of human events, there is a line that reads, "On such and such a date, Gandhi broke the salt law at Dandi." And somewhere beneath it, invisible but very real, is another line. The methodology was robust, the feet were not. That is the version the villagers and the marchers would recognize. And if you listen closely, past the official reports and the textbook summaries, you can still hear it. The soft slap of thousands of feet on dusty roads, the murmur of tired voices, the creak of walking sticks, the hiss of the sea, and the quiet, stubborn rhythm of people who decided that the world would have to rearrange itself around their footsteps. Which, frankly, is a more ambitious step count than your fitness app will ever ask for.